This is the Real Footy Podcast. Coming up, the Blues took care of the Cats again. Are they back? We'll look at the big changes at Princes Park. We'll discuss how the undermanned Dogs keep winning, what the Bombers took out of Anzac Day, and much more right after this.
Bulldogs win possession. Karmas, he's got the rock lobster in the goal square. He didn't need to get involved. And Buku Karmas has put through his first goal of the year. And look at them jump for joy. Brown looking for another stoppage goal. Feeds it to his mate Holman. He sizes them up. He makes it 10 straight. Blitzar's hand pass knocked down. Stolen to Cody. Deserved one. He's been a dominant force.
Hello and welcome. My name is Michael Gleeson, and joining me today are Jake Niall and Libby Birch. Welcome to you both.
It's exciting to be here. What a big weekend of footy.
Well, it was a big weekend, Jake. The Blues and Cats was probably the game. Was it the game of the round? Certainly one of the results of the round.
Oh, I'm not sure it was the game of the round, but it had the biggest ramifications, I suppose.
Yeah.
And it had a more epic feel than Anzac Day, even though the crowd, and they don't have the full solemnity of it. But 95 reunion, Carlton needing to win this game. I had a feeling if they can stand up in this game, looking at their team, they picked the best team they have for a while. And they had Elijah Hollins. They had Harry Mackay not only playing, but clearly playing very well. And they had pretty much an intact midfield with Sam Walsh having run into form over the previous 3 or 4 games, and he's now the player that he's always been. Yeah. And I think he's the biggest actual storylines around Mackay, but I think Walsh is actually the player that's transformed them a bit.
Yeah, I think Hollins certainly helped too. I mean, he was very dynamic. So when you bring, it's no mistake when Harry finds his form again like he did, certainly in that last quarter, he really dominated. And when he finds that sort of form, and he's working with Curnow, they've got a game that troubles Geelong though, clearly. I mean, they beat them, what was it, round 15 last year. The only query with them right now is that those 2 wins bookend only beating Richmond, West Coast and North in between. So hopefully this win, which is the third in a row, kicks them into a bit of momentum.
Libby, what's your take on the Carlton? Yeah.
My take is that their players like to be the hunters.
Yeah.
And if we look at the trend that we've seen over the last couple of years, they only play well when they're hunting something. At the start of this season in particular, they were the hunted, I believe. And that's why we probably saw that start that, wasn't to script, all those losses in a row. But now that they've got all those losses to their tally, the mindset shifts to, hey, we've actually got nothing to lose here and we can just play free-flowing footy because it can't get any worse than how we started. So now they're the hunters again. And we saw that in 2023, particularly with how they ended the year and hit to that prelim final. For me, it's their players prefer to be in that mindset. And potentially Voss thrives on that as well.
So they're an underdog team?
I think they perform better as an underdog team, correct?
And yes. If they're an overdog and they feel the pressure of expectation, they struggle more. Is that what
I would say? So yes. Yeah. But I don't think we've seen the evidence to say that they can play as a team that is the hunted. They only like playing as the hunters.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sure there's a logic to that. There is a logic to that. I'm sure there's other factors such as whether it's Mackay's form and fitness and whether it's Elijah Hollins in the team, whether, they lose Zach Williams or whether, George Hewitt's season, he's been a really good pickup for them. Not obviously he's been there longer than this year, but I think that there's got to be other factors going and an opposition and where that opposition is at any stage.
It's multifactorial, but I think it was perfect that they had sort of no disrespect to the 2 teams previously that they had played, but it was a good confidence building last 2 games for Carlton, and then knowing that they had a big test coming up, a big scalp to take, it builds the players' confidence. I thought they were a lot of players were better in key moments. They executed much better. Their fundamentals they nailed, and they nailed that more than Geelong on the day. And we saw the two keys absolutely stand up. And when your two keys stand up and take contested marks inside 50, it's almost impossible to beat a team that has got that. And that's what makes Carlton so good when they are good.
Well, our statistician Louis pointed out this morning that Carlton, when Curnow and Mackay kick 6 goals or more together,
yeah, they probably can't lose.
13-1
yeah,
is the record.
It's not a great shock, though, is it?
Well, it's like if we kick a big...
really well.
Well, yeah, but it's only 3 goals each. You'd think that it wouldn't be that decisive. They don't get a lot out of small forwards generally, and I think that's where Hollands did do something. And I think that there was, Durden played a better game than we've seen from him for a while. And Libby, you've highlighted that the small forward issue has been one that's plagued Carlton. They don't have what the Brisbane Lions have got or what Collingwood have got around the fall of the ball in their front half.
Well, the other one is that I think the other stat that Louis raised was something around Tom De Koning's hit-outs to advantages.
Massive.
Like extraordinary, 38 in 3 weeks. I think
38 in 3 weeks.
Can you boil that down as being one of the contributors on Sunday?
Well, I'm interested, Libby, in what you think about the De Koning contract situation, because he's obviously going to get... Carlton have got an offer on the table at over $1 million a year, but St Kilda have offered north of 1.5. People say 1.7. It's an interesting... I mean, if I'm Carlton, I'm sticking to what the offer is, and if he wants to get more than that, then let him go. That's me.
I think the contract situation as a player is really challenging time, particularly when it's being discussed during a current season. I would find that incredibly distracting as a player if I was in that position. And I have been in that position, but I've always pushed it to the end of the season. Sometimes you don't have that luxury as a player, but I think it's ultimately where De Koning wants to play his footy. Does he want a fresh start, or does he see Carlton winning a premiership?
Could also be where does he want to set himself up for the rest of his life? If you're talking $500,000 a year over 7 or 8 years.
Sometimes
sportsmen have such a limited time, as you know better than us, to earn from that.
Yeah, but it depends.
Period.
But it depends what he values. I'm only coming from a W point of view, and money doesn't matter so much to us because there's not as much there to alter the decision making.
Yeah.
However, I can't speak from a male player's point of view because that money is life-changing.
What about from a club perspective? That's an amount that St Kilda is prepared to pay reputedly. I'm not big on giving ruckman the big dollar.
No, I would be surprised. Any decision of that nature at Carlton now will be made, if not made by, have to be fully endorsed by Graham Wright. And I cannot see Graham Wright, based on his past, allowing a ruckman to get anything more than whatever the offer is at the moment. I just don't see that. He's the bloke who was instrumental in trading Brodie Grundy out of Collingwood, where they felt that they wanted that money freed up for other purposes. I just do not see that happening. So I think the offer is the offer.
Freed up for other purposes, like getting under the salary cap.
Well, no, not only that. No, well, by then they were under from the fire sale. It was that they went and got Tom Mitchell and Bobby Hill.
Yeah. What about the Cats though? This is a game they went into, not expecting to win, but you would heavily favour to win. What did you make of their performance, Jake?
Oh, I was disappointed. I would have said that their midfield got their clock cleaned, and they fought back late in the game and they had, I think, 10 out of 11 or 12 clearances, but the clearance differential early in the game was gigantic, and Sam Walsh ran rampant. If you look at Sam Walsh's performance vis-a-vis Holmes and Max Holmes and Bailey Smith, Sam Walsh decisively was the better running player in the game, and Cripps and Hewitt were fantastic.
It just felt like they had the territory. They were playing a territory game. They couldn't get it out.
Geelong was on the back foot, and Stewart looked not fit.
No. Smith turned the ball over a lot.
Yeah.
A foot coming out of defence.
Yeah, I like the way he kept going in the game.
Yeah.
One thing I love about Bailey Smith is that his effort was just constant with the run, and he kicked that goal, and I thought Patrick Dangerfield, There were some thrilling moments, Libby, where Dangerfield was in one-on-ones with Wiedering.
How good was that? No, but I keep thinking about that image, and I've got it saved on my phone because it's just so good, where he's powered out of a ground ball, he's sort of bench pressed one player and then bench pressed another player and then completely just run through a tackle. And got it to Bailey Smith, hands, and Bailey Smith kicked a goal. And I thought that's exactly why Chris Scott wants him to play in the forward line.
Yeah, when he came through and poor Adam Sard found himself in the way, it was just like, oh God, did it have to be me?
Well, he doesn't have the game at this, or it doesn't have quite a few things this guy had, but there's shades of the way he played in Gary Ablett Senior. I'm showing my age here.
Yeah,
but just that power. From not a really, really tall player, but who plays taller.
You know who makes me feel like he is very similar to, and I think it's Horn Francis. They've got very, very similar qualities, Dangerfield and Horn Francis, in their power out of stoppage, their ability to shake tackles, and their speed.
And clean.
Yeah, and clean.
Yeah, that one-on-one contest with Wiedering in the last quarter,
that was a great
went out, it was like, there were about 15 free kicks that could have and should have been paid, and they were both ripping each other's jumper off, and they just sort of go, well, you're both doing it, keep going.
Yeah, I love that.
They paid one eventually against Danger. I thought he was a bit stiff.
Yeah. I thought Carlton had a pretty good run of it, generally, in that certainly in that last term, it felt, but not that it decided the game or anything, but.
Well, they won a lot more contests than Geelong in this game.
And that's what I was talking about, more of the moments that Carlton won. You know, footy comes down to moments, and in those big games, I think Carlton executed those better.
So cut to the chase, Libby. Is this their back, or is this, as Gleeson posed in his column for Monday, or is this you want to see a body of work?
I want to see a body of work.
No, I didn't pose that they were back. I said I posed that the next month will decide whether they're back. We'll know by the bye, which is a bit, sit on the fence, because you're going to be saying, hey, after half a season, we'll know whether they're back or not. But
is that an outlier performance, or is that?
Well, look at the last 12 months since that last Geelong win. They haven't beaten anyone other than a bottom four team. So let's see them do it against something other than a bottom four team or Geelong. Hopefully this 3 in a row now leads into, they play Adelaide in Adelaide. Adelaide, that was a disappointing loss for them. I gave them a pass the week before because I expected them to win the week before, but against Fremantle, it was a game that was coming off 5 days and in the heat and short breaks, and they looked like a team that was just really tired. I don't know this week's Fremantle, but and then this week it just felt like, where have they gone? Where's the Adelaide of early in the season? So Carlton playing them.
Well, that's a hell of a game, really.
Well, and if you hunted, psychology is right. Adelaide will be hunting Carlton this week, so that'll put it directly to the test.
Exactly.
Adelaide's, they've got a lot right. But their midfield will be interesting against the Blues. So, the other big one over the weekend was the Bulldogs over GWS, and the GWS really where have they gone? But the Bulldogs, honestly, they've got Bont back. They've had one game, about 15 minutes of play with both Bontempelli and Darcy in the team, and still there where they're sitting.
Yeah, I loved your points in your piece today, Michael, about this. And I have a little theory about being there in 2016 when they won that premiership. I was just signed on as a Bulldog at that time. And I know we'd obviously had interactions with Beveridge at that time, but he's such a storyteller. He loves the themes. He loves having the players with him. And you spoke about that today, Michael, about how he's got his players.
Yeah.
You can see that. And I think the whole Jamara situation has actually galvanised the group. And we've seen that in the way that they're executing together in games where they probably have been undermanned over the past 5 rounds. Particularly, I think the way that they've performed has been amazing, considering they haven't had Bont for the majority of the year. Treloar as well. They've had significant injuries. You also mentioned that he's been willing to drop players, bring players like Bustling up into the back line, which is huge. He's shown great trust. But I think all these things have galvanised this side, and they are dangerous when they're united. And we saw that in 2016. And I remember visually going into the Western Bulldogs in 2016, he had this big ship painted up on the wall, and it said "Run into the fire." and that was, I don't know what the ship had to do with that, but that's
Isn't
how
a ship
that's
of water in the water.
in the water. But that is how theme-based Beveridge is. It sometimes doesn't make sense to the outsider, but it always makes sense to his players. And I still don't get it to this day.
I remember on this Bob Murphy telling me a story where they'd been in 2015 when he'd first come in. There's a couple of stories, but one was this one about they were going to play, for some reason, they were going to end up outnumbered in their defence by the opposition forwards by some setup or something. And they were like, how on earth is this going to work?
Yeah.
And he said, because our players will beat the 2-on-1. Like, he had this belief, and they were like, no, that doesn't sound right. And he was like,
it is like that,
he was
though.
telling them.
Believe in the ship.
Yeah, the ship ran into the fire. It just made no sense, but they believe, like, it makes sense to them. It makes sense
They love a
in-house, and that's
mangled
all
metaphor.
that matters.
Yeah, and when he says things in the media, I've noticed too, that he says things that sound ridiculous about, Treloar's been targeted, and you think, no, he hasn't been. And he's, and the people, the cowards saying these things, I think the intended audience is not.
No, it's his players.
It's only his players. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what we see. We see.
Yeah.
What's he going on about?
It's all the messaging is for his players, not for the media.
Yep. All the fans.
Yeah, exactly.
I've they've got a sneaky feeling about them for the end of the year. They just feel like
They're getting a lot out of
they're getting.
Frieger.
Yeah, well, he was outstanding. And so, look, when I mentioned the dropping players, obviously Jack McRae was found. He realised we're not going ahead with Jack McRae, so he was marginalised last year and then traded out. Caleb Daniel, well, we need something with more penetration of the kick. They moved those players out, and it was controversial, certainly when they dropped Bailey Dale at the time last year.
Well, that was the one I couldn't understand.
We were just out of form as it goes afterwards, but I couldn't understand at the time, and still, that the choice was some of the players that were playing, like Bramble and Baker and that. I thought, can't see that really working. But these guys, you go, okay, Busslinger. Busslinger's not a great surprise because he's he was a top draft pick, but he's given him his chance now. Fraser was from picking the 40s or whatever.
If they're playing Jesse Hogan and Aaron Cadman's a young player, you could do that, but they've just said, okay, no, we'll throw the kid. We'll throw the kid in first game.
I've watched Busslinger for years in the VFL, and I've always thought he had such a confidence at centre half back or full back. His ability to play much like Liam Jones does, but Liam Jones obviously a lot older now. But I thought that was an amazing set of confidence from Beveridge to say, hey, I want you to go and play on Jesse Hogan in your first game of AFL footy. I love that.
Is there something as the game becomes more scientific and these things, Libby, that Luke Beveridge, a bit old school, channels, it's going to sound like a ridiculous term, the power of irrationality. Something that's
run into the fire, Jake, on the ship.
On the ship.
Yeah, exactly. Run into the fire. Just things that don't make any sense, but they get an emotional uplift from the playing group.
Absolutely. And I think it's Beveridge uses his gut instincts, and sometimes we're so heavily reliant on this statistical part of the game, so much so that sometimes that is irrational, the statistical part of the game. So why don't we just go back to our gut feeling as a coach? And I think that's exactly what he does.
As a complete aside, one of the more amusing things was after the game, watching the coverage, and they're interviewing Libba in the rooms, and he's completely knackered. It's a knock. He's just being straight and whatever, and they're trying to yuck it up and say, come on, be funnier, be funnier. And he's like, no, I don't think so. No. And then they go away from him. He goes, oh, that Libba, isn't he a card? It's like, he just didn't want to talk to you.
Didn't want to talk.
Anyway, the Swans and the Gold Coast. That was one of the more extraordinary turnarounds as well, Jake. 38 points. Absolutely smashed in the first half, certainly the first quarter and a half in clearances, their vaunted midfield. Heaney was outstanding. Chad Warner looked like he was back to last year's form. And then they just completely flipped.
Well, it's the few against the many.
Yeah.
If you want to summarise that game, Gold Coast have got a more players at the moment.
They've
just got a better collection of players because the Swans, forget these. I know they've only used something like 28 players, not a huge number, but the Swans have been really cruel by injury.
Yeah.
And just shockingly, like Goulden hasn't played. So he's in their top certainly their top 3 players. Papley's in their top 5 or 6 players. He hasn't played much. He played, 1.5 games. And then there's Mills hasn't played at all.
Fox,
yeah. So their best
final.
23.
Adams.
Just.
You won't be relying.
Amadi.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
They have lost so many key players to the structural integrity of their game plan that it is now, if they can't last 4 quarters because it's so reliant on a player like Heaney to play in the forward line and in the midfield at the same time, which is impossible.
Yeah.
And it gets tiring, and that's why teams are coming over the top of them in the last quarter, because there's just not that depth, as you explained.
Yeah. I think Witts was really important in that second half, and the midfield just got on top. Obviously, King and Walter kicks a couple. They had a lot more entries. It sort of swung in the midway through the second quarter, I think, but they didn't capitalise the Gold Coast. But they're a good team. They've had, they've won. They obviously lost the game they should have won last week, but they'll Q Clash this week.
Massive.
That's actually one that's got
that's at the Gabba, though, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it is. Yeah,
could be the biggest Q Clash yet.
I think the Swans provided a bit of blueprint, though, on to how to beat the Suns, in that if you can get on top in the clearance and contest, Gold Coast have got nothing. And so I think if Brisbane can target that this week, clearance and contest, then, you're taking away Gold Coast's biggest strength, which is their ability to gain territory from that and get their forward half intercept game going.
I reckon they're better than that this year. I reckon that having brought in Rioli and Noble, they have got a rebound and an intercept game from behind the ball. So if they do lose that, they can recover. But they need to be able to bring that. Their defenders need to be able to halve it when it comes in. Collins becomes really important there, and Andrew.
But just a slight check on what you just said. Noble and Rioli are attacking players. I think you can punch holes in them.
You can. I'm just saying that if it's not just if you lose contest, then they've got nothing left. I think that they have got a rebound game
well, I'm saying
that they didn't have last year.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think they've got another layer, but I think that the stalwart of their game is that.
Yeah,
that's their one wood.
Yeah,
and
Anderson
so
and Rowell.
you can
and Witts.
And if you can get on top there, you can then apply your own game plan. To that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, absolutely makes sense. But I think that they were one-dimensional last year, and I think they've added that second dimension with rebound run. So it'll be good. It'll be good.
Will they play finals?
Yeah, they will. Well, they've had the soft draw in the first half of the year, and overall they've got a fairly soft draw.
Don't start me on the draw.
Lions, Dogs and Hawks, their next 3, which is big.
That's going to decide them, isn't
exactly.
it? Whether they're legitimate. I mean, they can still get in without, winning all of those because they have been banking wins. But, I think that their draw has been pretty mild. And, I still think that they've got enough wins to get there. Anyway, we'll come back and talk about Anzac Day and Anzac Eve.
We're online all the time. Just search Age Real Footy on Facebook or Twitter.
Here is Bobby Hill. From here to tackle. Pocket! Broken play. He makes it work. You wouldn't read about it. That is ridiculous.
Welcome back. And Anzac Day, every time it comes around, is the biggest game of the round. 92,000 there, Jake. I think the result in the end was probably, as you went in, not unexpected, but for a period there, Bombers got in front. Looked the rain, the weather coming in, looked like they had a sniff.
Oh, yes, they did. I scratched my head when they got in front as to I don't know how they did it. They scored 4 goals in 6 minutes is the answer, and then they got a couple after half time. But the pattern of the game was not that, and Collingwood had actually butchered it a bit in their forward 50 and made a couple of errors because the setup behind the ball and the experience differential in the game was enormous. I think the big tell out of this game, if I had to pick out one thing, is that after the game, Brad Scott talked about being helpless in the box when the communications went down in the third quarter, and Craig McRae talked about, we trust these guys to do it. You've got 5 or 6 coaches on the field for Collingwood, led by Pendlebury and Sidebottom, and Jeremy Howe, 3 in particular, but others as well who can do this. An incredible amount of experience, the oldest team we've seen, but players still playing very well, like Sidebottom in particular. And you've got at the Essendon side, you've got Zach Merritt, who's a fantastic player and trying to be the best leader he can, but with nothing like that ability to adjust. And I think that's one thing we're starting to learn is there's this constant debate about coaching versus talent. It's an eternal debate. And I think people talk about talent. They should be talking more about what you've got out on the field in leadership. Because the way the modern game has evolved, Libby, it seems more important.
Oh, absolutely. And I think you're seeing, I think the most important part of the game now that I don't think anyone has been able to execute as well as probably what the Pies do is stopping momentum swings. And that comes down in game, in live games. And I heard Dean Cox speak about it, about their game that they face as the Swans. But the ability to identify when something in the game isn't going your way is all down to leadership. Making a decision on the day, in that moment, to hang on. We've lost a few stoppages here. We need to have a smaller tap and just create a number of repeat stoppages just to slow the game down. That comes down to leadership. That comes down to experience and instincts. Now, that's an excellent point that Brad Scott said that, he felt helpless. That means that there probably isn't enough leaders on the field to make those decisions in those moments, and he hasn't seen it enough to trust it.
Well, he went to America to see the Los Angeles Rams and to meet this author of this book about leadership. And he took Zach Merritt and he took Andy McGrath over summer. And I spoke to Brad about it and subsequently in an interview, and he felt on the record that Essendon's deficit in leadership in his time at the club has been greater than the deficit in talent.
I believe you need to have leaders in all three lines across the footy field. So you need to have, they've obviously got Zach Merritt in the middle of the field, but you need to have leaders that can connect with Zach Merritt at either end. And if you don't have that, then Zach Merritt only sort of maybe impacts the midfield, but can't touch the sides with the forward line and the back line.
Yep. But having said all that, I think there was a lot of positive for Essendon in this game. They were outmatched in ability and experience, but their back line, we're now starting to see with Zach Reid, was just an enormous fill-up for them to see this guy who's been drafted in the year 2020. Gleeson, you wrote about this, and I was talking about it the other day.
Game.
Yeah, but to see what he did, he wasn't. I think Andrew Wu gave him votes, the bottom vote in the age. I'm not sure he was votes. I don't think he was, but he stood up in a way where he showed he could be a real player. And with Todd Ridley, if they can get Ridley and Reid working together with Redmond and McGrath, they can build a defensive system behind the ball that will make them a much better team.
I thought they looked really sound, but in the end they also gave up 16, 17 goals on a wet day.
Yeah,
which is not just.
But that's from the midfield.
That's
from the midfield. Their midfield got smashed.
You talk about that leadership. They've got Collingwood had two players that have probably played more games than half the two players combined that played more games than half of Essendon's team. Pendlebury and Sidebottom are up over 800 games. So you've got those two, and Sidebottom was
they're not 800.
Well, close. Well, Pendlebury's well over 4. He's over 4, and Sidebottom was outstanding and so clean. He's such a wet weather player. Then, you had Josh Dacos off a half-back flank. Just that, in the first three quarters, I thought they were the two most dominant players. And in the end, Billy Elliott kicks 5.
Yeah. Well, they're not a team, Libby, that seem to rely. I mean, Nick Dacos clearly is the exception. But other than Nick Dacos, and structurally, if they play the best side, it's probably Darcy Moore. But there doesn't seem to be many other players that you look at, maybe Darcy Cameron, but there's not many other players you look at and go, oh, they can't win without him against a good team.
No, and I think that's what makes them so dangerous, particularly their forward line. I don't think there's a forward line in the comp that you could say each week one of these players is going to kick 2 or 3 goals. They are so versatile in the way that forward line works. They work for each other, and if Nick Dacos is not playing well, then Josh Dacos plays well, or someone else plays well. Everyone's got a role to play, and I think it's more of a team-based structure.
The interesting one for me with that will be, it's a decision that's been forced on them now by McStay's injury, but I'd be interested had he not suffered the injury. They'll get each of Essendon's run-ons came when he was rucking as the second ruck. Now, whether that was just coincidence, it was those momentum shifts came with him as second ruck. There will be a question of whether McStay is adequate enough as a second ruck. Now, if he's not, then Cox has to play, and if Cox is playing, then it's got to be either. It's most likely going to be one of Myercheck, Membry,
probably Membry, that
goes out. Yeah. So we'll see, in the next, whatever it is, 6 weeks or so, 6 to 8 weeks that McStay's out, Cox will get the extended run of playing. and he is good as a second ruck. He's not been as effective as a forward.
Not as good as a forward as McStay.
No, he can take a mark, but he's been missing his shots at goal. But he will be interesting how he goes in managing that.
I'll ask the question of Libby. Are they flag favourites?
Yeah.
I would put them more or less on a par with Brisbane.
But I think it's conducive to the fact that he needs to keep with older players comes a risk of injury.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
fatigue. So I think there's positives as we're seeing, but there's also,
as you wrote
yes,
about the experience.
But there's also negatives in that if that stays on the right side of the line, that their players can stay fit and healthy and managed well throughout the season, and that might be taking a few games off for some players and them coming back refreshed.
The advantage being that now they've banked early
banked
wins, so you can take more of a risk with managing those players. But I thought there was a big, strong takeaway for Essendon out of that game. And I thought Reid was one. I thought McGrath soundly beat Bobby, who was actually, I'd not seen it before, but at halftime was -3 ranking points. He hadn't touched the ball and he'd given away a free kick.
But he still
impacted the game.
Impacted the game when that third
kicked
quarter.
A great goal.
He kicked a goal and he helped set up another one. He did a big interception. That's the thing about Collingwood. They have players that may not be your day, but it can always be your moment, and that's how they play.
When you cast back to a few weeks ago when Ben Mackay was the whipping boy for losses, and he was there on his own, one out, and now you get Reid coming in, and you've got Ridley back. They look so much more stable, and they look like they're also they're a trio in defence that have barely played together. Like all three together. I haven't got the numbers, but I'd be surprised if it's more than a handful of times that's happened. Particularly given, Reid's only played 15 games in his time, so that I think that was an outstanding thing. Chris breaking Stein's record, worth acknowledging.
Yep,
that is absolutely incredible.
The ice baths, I think you spoke to him about this once.
That is so hard to do.
Once. I think everyone's spoken to him. You can't talk to him without two things coming up. One being steak knives, which he hates, because he was the add-on to the Dane Beams deal, and then just the record. And he said, look, he's had games where he was crook but played, and he would have certainly played through games that maybe others.
Oh, exactly.
Wouldn't
Yeah,
have.
you'd have to.
So there's a strength in that.
Is this going to be this sort of thing of the inverse? If Scott Pendlebury ends up with the games record, which is possible now, that Pendlebury, not to disrespect Boomer Harvey, but Pendlebury's stature in the game is greater. Right, as a footballer, he's an out-and-out champion of the game. Boomer was a very, very good player, but who played a long time, didn't win 7 best and fairest or make 8 All-Australians or whatever Pendlebury's done, Norm Smith medal, etc. In the case of Jack Crisp, he's coming against an icon, a cultural icon as much with Jim Steins, and there'll always be. It's not his fault.
So do you reckon it should have been a bit like Hayden and Taylor matching Bradman's batting record, just sort of declaring, retiring
it was
before
Taylor,
you break
wasn't
it. Yeah, it was Taylor.
Well, footy doesn't work that way. It's a team
beforehand.
game. It's a team game.
Well, he could have, got a cold the week before and then not missed the game.
What do you think about that, Libby? Is it sort of as we're at Melbourne, the shadow of the late Jim Steins, who's a storied figure?
Yeah, well, obviously he's got an incredible legacy, but everything is important in our game, I think, to celebrate, and Crisp deserves the limelight.
What did you think of the 3 games offered? Here you are. You can have this. Imposed on Paul Curtis for the tackle, Jake.
We had to be suspended. It's just whether it was 2 or 3. That's me in a nutshell. Like, the player was concussed. The tackle was not safe
because his arms were pinned.
Yes.
Did he have an opportunity to not go forward with the tackle if you're tackling from behind?
I think 3 weeks is excessive for that tackle, because the reason being is it's not a malicious sling tackle. It's just a tackle that happens in every action. And I actually had a look at the Hawks West Coast game the following day, and the exact same tackle happened. The Wizard was tackling Harley Reid, and it was the exact same motion, exact same position that Paul Curtis was in, and Harley Reid just doesn't hit his head. But
the game's always been judged that way.
Yes, I understand.
What is the outcome?
The outcome matters, of course, and the AFL is trying to protect head injuries, but I don't think it's a 3-week suspension.
It's a bit like, remember a few years ago when Nick Nat landed on a player afterwards, and it was that idea of understanding that you're not doing anything necessarily wrong, but you've also got to understand a size differential. So Nick Watson bringing down Harley Reid is going to struggle to bring him down, let alone slam him into the ground. Curtis is sort of evenly matched and they're running together, but the forward momentum.
But it
does create
tackle.
a difficulty. I don't know how you have a chase down tackle without that forward momentum.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. You can't stop forward momentum if you're desperately, as a forward, chasing down someone who's running away from you. Of course, you're going to have a forward momentum. I guess the only thing you can do is which is very hard to do in the moment, and the game's going at 1,000,000 miles an hour, is to roll to the side. But I believe he tried to do that.
What did you think of the broader, the Horne-Francis byplay?
I enjoy it. I like the whole...
It's a bit red meat.
Yeah, I like the whole Horne-Francis North subplot. And Horne-Francis generally is a compelling figure. He's a guy, if you're watching a game and you're live at the game, your eyes are drawn to him constantly. One thing about his style of play, Libby, you don't have to look at the number. You don't even have to look at the back of the number. You know it's him from the way he runs, his gait, his approach at the ball. He's so distinctive, and it is a lot like Dangerfield.
That's why I said I think it reminds me of Dangerfield.
Yep.
Yeah.
They're getting into him throughout. Like it was eventually going to snap. Yeah.
But it was actually good for North. I think North...
Yeah.
I liked North in this game. I thought this is the first game of the year where I felt like they gave what they should have given more.
Didn't raise the flag.
Well, they could have won the game. If you sort of look at it, if Larkey had kicked that goal.
I loved it. And I had the privilege of calling the game in specials, and I just thought that obviously from North Melbourne, but what the team brought was this fight, contest, and a little bit of physical arrogance to the contest, particularly in the second term. I would not say that for their first term because I thought it was appalling. But after that, their game was sound in terms of their ability to come and fight at the contest. And I actually think that helped them edging, getting Horne-Francis rolled up, getting Port Adelaide rolled up, because they actually kicked 4 goals from 50-metre penalties, which were resulted in frazzling Port Adelaide into making silly mistakes. Because, yes, we know Port Adelaide play off emotion, so why don't you play to that? And I think it's good evidence for North Melbourne.
Was there a sillier mistake than Pal Pepper kicking into the man on the mark 8 metres out from
No.
a goal directly in front?
No.
That was
actually a pretty entertaining game.
I don't even know how you do that.
That ball goes sideways off his boot. The same thing out on the foot. What is going on? I don't know how you do that. The other thing that was interesting in that Horne-Francis thing was the moment where Butters of all people is calming him down, and then you've got Ken talking to him with him and Rosie sort of alongside Francis, and he went to brush them off. And you're like, didn't look good, a bit disrespectful for the guys. But the players both grabbed him back and said, "No, mate, listen, just calm down," which I quite liked. It was a bit not dissimilar to Zorko, which I didn't really like with Fags the other week. But then you could see Lachie Neale called out to him, from the bench as well, going, "Mate, no, that's not," But which brings us to Ross Lyon and his tribute, Hugo Garcia, who was subbed out midway through, 12 minutes through into the second quarter, which is very early for a tactical sub. And
Ross has got a saying, "Shoot one to educate 1,000."
So he certainly put a bullet in.
So I think it's an education, not just for Garcia.
But I would challenge that in saying how much of that is education piece for a 19-year-old to be.
I don't think he's the intended target.
I know, but does the 19-year-old like Hugo Garcia feel like he's the target? Potentially.
Well, he would have as he's sitting on the
That's
bench.
what I mean.
Ross is standing.
Well, he was the target.
Yeah, I understand. I completely
was,
understand what you're saying. It's everyone else, but yeah, I believe it could be Garcia feeling it's only him.
Well, for those that sitting at home and hadn't seen it, Ross also, after taking him off, was down on the bench and was, on the video, was in his face, pointing the finger, absolutely berating him, which was surprising because it's unusual to see from the coach in a public forum. there is zero doubt that happens on a weekly basis at halftime and after the games in the meeting rooms of every team, or not every team, but a number of coaches will tear strips that way and isolate a player.
Less so these days.
But this was remarkable for the fact that it was so public, and it was a bit jarring because the kid, you're feeling for the kid. You're sitting there going, "There's nowhere to go." I mean, it felt at odds with the sort of. I couldn't imagine Ross being up in the Highlands outside Bright around a campfire, kumbaya, and making daisy chains and telling each other how loving and vulnerable they are. But he was. It was interesting when he was asked about it, and I'm not saying he's right or wrong in how he wants to motivate his players and teach his players. But what I troubled with was his sort of dismissiveness in the press conference afterwards about. When asked about just the tactical thing about Garcia, and it was like, well, do you know the names? Do you know what these roles are? Do you know what this? And listed off some, in-house footy jargon and positions. Like, well, Ross, don't be patronising. It's a pretty simple question. Why you remove the player so early in the game, which is quite unusual.
Which had nothing to do with an injury.
And when you are to being dismissive to the people in front, you're being dismissive to your fans who are sitting there at home wondering exactly the same thing. What was it that really upset you so much that you got him off so early in the game and that you tore strips off him on the bench? I just thought it was...
Might have been he didn't really want to answer it.
Yeah.
That's my take on it. I don't think he really wanted to answer the question, which might have been an assessment of... I would hope that in his dealings with Garcia that he has made the judgment that Garcia can handle that.
Yeah.
That would be my only comment on it. I think that it's horses for courses with how you deal with, not just in coaching, but in any management job, how you deal with individuals who have different strengths and vulnerabilities. That's all.
We'll take a break there, come back with quick questions.
Get access to every episode as it drops. Hit subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.
Gorn again, Chandler, Fritsch, Petty, back to Fritsch. That's a bender. That's coming back. That's a beauty.
Well, welcome back and straight into quick questions. The Demons on Anzac Eve got on the winners list with their back-to-back win over the Tigers, and now they've got the Eagles. Finals still within their reach, Jake?
Well, it's statistically, more than statistically possible. It's quite conceivable, but I've lost faith, and I would say they're not. I don't think they're good enough the way they're constituted to do it. So no.
Yeah, they're only 2 games out, but I think that there's better teams ahead of them and better teams in the 8.
Well, for example, we talked about Carlton at length. Carlton are well ahead of Melbourne.
Yeah, more so than just the one game on the ladder. What did you make of West Coast's decision to play Oscar Allen in the back line against Hawthorn in Sunday's loss at Marvel Stadium? Libby?
I thought, I was having a think about this, and some players just aren't backmen. Like,
Tony Lockett.
We've seen Oscar Allen play so well in that forward line, and I understand there's player issues being able to, he's got more players that can play in the forward line, so hence why Allen's playing in the back line. But instinctively, sometimes players just read the ball better when the play is coming towards them rather than the other way where the backs, it's just a completely different position. So I wonder whether, they're doing him a disservice by having him there because that's not his true strength.
Some players you can run into form by putting them behind the ball where they see it coming towards them.
Yeah, but not as a key back, I don't reckon.
No.
A key back is a really, really hard position because, you're constantly in one-on-ones and you've got a different mindset to if you were going to be a key forward in that instance. So as a half-back, yes, I would agree with you, but he's not a half-back. He's a key back.
It's also interesting that they're doing it against a team that he might go to.
Well, and he's, doing it with the bloke who's captain and out of contract and throwing him to the back line. Was there a message in that?
I don't know.
Yeah. With 7 rounds in, what did you think? Who do you think right now is the front runner for the Rising Star Award?
Well, I tipped Levi Ashcroft at the start of the year, but I think it is him at the moment. But Connor O'Sullivan has been great. He's been really good, but I doubt a defender will win it. Defenders never really win anything, but which is disappointing. But he's been amazing. I've really loved him at Geelong in that back line, but Levi Ashcroft for me.
Yeah, I picked Ashcroft as well because I had penciled in Jagger Smith and then he did the knee. Yes, I'd say Ashcroft is, pretty short odds. Honourable mention to Sam Lawler, who I think has been pretty good as a first straight up. And there'll be another player that we haven't mentioned that's played 4 games or 5 games last year that is eligible that people aren't even talking about.
Yeah, I went Kako at the start of the year and he hasn't quite had the breakout game yet. It's probably Ashcroft because I can't tell them apart. So you assume every time you see it, you don't know which one's which anyway. So he's getting his brother's stats at the moment.
He's getting double touches, yeah.
Well, that's all we've got time for this week. Thanks to both of you, Jake and Libby, for joining us. Thanks also to Channel 7 and Fox Footy for the audio we've used in this episode. If you'd like to get in touch, you can do so via email, realfootypod@theage.com.au. Don't forget to subscribe, rate and review wherever you get your podcasts. The Tipping Podcast will be back on Thursday. Catch you then.